Netanyahu's government has been under pressure from even mainstream outlets like CNN, and even subservient Zionists like Dana Bash gave him some grief for the inadequate, chaotic, and at times, of course, brutal and violent delivery of aid, quote unquote, into northern Gaza. Well, now UNRWA says Israel will end its food convoys to northern Gaza. The decision is totally unacceptable, and those that took that decision must assume the responsibility, facing history, the consequences of the decision. Here is the United Nations Antonio Guterres on this decision to suspend aid shipments altogether into the north.
Decision not to allow UNRWA's convoys to go to northern Gaza, where we have a dramatic starvation situation, is totally unacceptable. And those that took that decision must assume the responsibility, facing history, of the consequences of the decision in relation to the dramatic situation of the people in northern Gaza, where, as I mentioned, we have already children dying of hunger.
Now, keep in mind, Benjamin Netanyahu said when defending his plans to invade Rafah on the ground that there were places for civilians to go. They could flee north because they already cleared out all of the Hamas infrastructure in the north. Well, apparently, now the north is too dangerous to send food into because they are stopping. The head of the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency said on Sunday Israel had informed the UN that it will no longer approve UNRWA food convoys to the north of Gaza. This is outrageous and makes it intentional to obstruct life-saving assistance during a man-made famine. These restrictions must be lifted, UNRWA head Philippe Lazzarini said on social media platform X. UNRWA, which provides aids and services to Palestinian refugees in Gaza and across the region, has been in crisis since Israel accused a dozen of its staff of involvement in the October 7th Hamas attacks against Israel. Amazing how an accusation of a dozen people in an agency of 13,000 inside Gaza, 30,000 overall, just an accusation like that can plunge the entire organization into crisis. That's what happens when you have the kind of power that Israel has. They make an accusation about a fraction of a percent of an organization's members, and look what happens. The allegations prompted UNRWA's biggest donor, the United States, and some others to pause funding, putting the agency's future in doubt. However, other countries, including Canada, Australia, and Sweden, have since restored it. UNRWA and Egypt said last week that Lazzarini, who was on a visit to Cairo, was denied entry to Gaza by Israeli authorities. By preventing UNRWA to fulfill its mandate in Gaza, the clock will tick faster towards famine, and many more will die of hunger, dehydration, and lack of shelter, Lazzarini added. So, let's put some attention here on the United States, because this related headline broke as well. This is from the Israeli outlet Haaretz. U.S. set to bar UNRWA funding through March 2025. So for an entire year, a potential critical blow for the UN agency. Yeah, I'd say so. The fate of the UN agency dedicated to Palestinian refugees may well have been revealed after U.S. congressional leaders released the text of the final batch of spending bills that need to be passed this weekend to avoid a government shutdown. So this was last weekend, and those bills did pass. The bills released overnight include what amounts to a year-long ban on U.S. funding for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, known as UNRWA. This amounts to a devastating blow and a potential death knell for the organization that had been responsible for navigating Gaza's humanitarian crisis prior to the international community's halted funding in January following Israeli allegations that at least 12 staffers participated in October 7th. The massive 1,000-plus page bill includes a stipulation barring funding to UNRWA, quote, for any amounts provided in prior fiscal years or in fiscal year 2024, or for amounts provided in fiscal year 2025 until March 25th, 2025. So 1 year, meaning the Biden administration will be unable to lift the pause on funding at all at a time when the threat of famine in Gaza is more dire than ever. U.S. President Joe Biden already said he would sign the bill, which will go to the floor of a House vote on Friday, immediately followed by a Senate vote once it passes before Friday's midnight deadline. Senator Bernie Sanders called those who voted to cut funding for UNRWA as the Starvation Caucus, while Senator Chris Van Hollen warned that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long wanted to dismantle UNRWA. Doing so now would be a death sentence for thousands. Van Hollen called on Biden to immediately release current funding to UNRWA, as the EU, Canada, and others have done, in order to help prevent the famine that now sits at Gaza's doorstep. Refugees International President Jeremy Konendiek called the ban unconscionable, warning famine is spreading in Gaza and the Biden administration is cooperating with Netanyahu's effort to destroy the largest aid provider. Officials believe UNRWA has enough funds to currently operate through the next 2 months. Should it somehow manage to stay afloat for the next calendar year, it would take significant political capital to reinstate the funding, something Democrats have not indicated they are willing to spend.
Profiles and courage.
Wow. You talk about a dire report there. For 1 year, they're saying the organization can only last about 60 more days without an infusion of funds. And past that point, what happens?
This, if you want to talk about something to pressure your senator and congresspeople about, it would be this.
Yes.
So don't be impressed, as I don't think any of our audience really is, with the United States abstaining from blocking the ceasefire resolution, because at exactly the same moment, they are complicit, overtly, directly, not by implication, not by lack of action, through direct action, complicit in the genocide being committed by Israel. That abstention is purely for the votes. It won't work. I don't think the Muslim community in Dearborn and other places is that stupid that in a simple abstention, oh yeah, you know what? Let's vote for Joe. After all, we made a mistake.
Right. They let a symbolic resolution finally pass through, so all's forgiven, right?
Yeah. If anything, this demonstrates the real agenda. We are in lockstep with Israel as we have been, which just makes it even stupider that Israel threw a tantrum about that meaningless gesture, about what was, in effect, a political gesture. In terms of substantive policy, haven't changed a bit, clearly.
Exactly. All of these symbolic gestures do nothing but reflect the changing political environment on the ground. Like, they are a reflection of public sentiment. Polling just came out. I believe it was today. It may have been from yesterday. I saw the tweet today, very recent, last 48 hours for sure, saying a majority of Americans now oppose military action in Gaza, which means public sentiment has now turned completely against the Israeli army. And those kinds of moves.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, no, you have not seen nothing yet. But that's the point, really, is that when you see the U.S. going from vetoing all the ceasefire resolutions to this time voting absent and allowing it to go through, that is just a reflection of the public will here at home, because they feel like they need to do something to save face. But that's all it is. It's worth paying attention to those things because those, in a way, mirror the momentum, shall we say, of a ceasefire, the momentum against Israel here at home. But that's about it. In terms of what they're actually willing to do, as Russell just said, this tells you exactly where they are when the rubber hits the road.
Please clap.